Paul uses a striking image of cutting people off from fellowship in Galatians chapter 1 verses 8 and 9. He says, "But even if we or an angel from heaven should preach to you a gospel contrary to the one we preach to you, let him be accursed. As we have said before, so now I say again, if anyone is preaching to you a gospel contrary to the one you received, let him be accursed." There is, it seems, a givenness to the gospel message, which means it cannot be revoked or supplemented or enhanced or transformed by additional teaching insights, even from angels. If anyone tries to do this, they are under a curse, says Paul. This curse, or anathema, is a curse from God which puts someone outside of God's sphere of blessing. Paul is invoking a curse from God, or asking God to curse someone, rather than telling the Galatians what they should do with the person who is preaching contrary to the gospel. He's not directly saying that they should be separated from the church as such. However, the implication is that if they are outside God's blessing, they are outside the church, since their gospel will not lead to glory, but to perdition. Anathema is the word for the divine curse in the Old Testament, which puts something or someone under the ban, devoted to utter destruction. That physical destruction language cannot be literally what is meant in the New Testament, however, because the nascent church did not have the legal authority to judicially kill people for heresy, nor do we have any evidence that they ever did so. Rather, as John Stott says, the apostle expresses the wish that God's judgment will fall upon these people. The Galatian churches, it is implied, will surely then not accord such teachers a welcome or a hearing, but refuse to receive or listen to them because they are men whom God has rejected. The false gospel teachers ought to be separated from the church, since they are under eternal condemnation. There's nothing here, however, about handing false teachers over to the secular magistrate to be punished or condemned to death, such as we do find in parts of the later Christian tradition. Paul's contending for the gospel in this letter of Galatians also involves him in a public dispute with the Apostle Peter, which he talks about in Galatians chapter 2, verse 11 onwards. "I opposed Peter to his face," writes Paul, "because he stood condemned." Paul felt that Peter was not living out the implications of the gospel in his behaviour towards the Gentiles in Antioch. Peter had begun to separate himself from the Gentiles at mealtimes, one crucial moment where togetherness or separateness is often demonstrated publicly. He was doing so publicly and influentially, in that many were following Peter in this action, and so Paul felt he must confront the problem publicly as well. Quote, "When I saw that their conduct was not in step with the truth of the gospel," the truth that Jews and Gentiles together are one in Christ by faith alone. Paul shows how Peter was being inconsistent with clear and straightforward teaching, but there's no vitriol or lack of respect in the way that he recounts this episode or in how it happened, as far as we know. That is also quite instructive. Paul also speaks about the false teachers in Galatia in Galatians chapter 4, verse 17, saying that they make much of you, but for no good purpose. They want to shut you out, that you may make much of them. See, there is a false sense of separation going on here, as the false teachers try various methods for making the Galatian Christians subservient to their false gospel. So there's a right separation and a wrong separation throughout the book of Galatians. It is wrong to separate from those with whom one is properly united, as Peter had been doing. And it is wrong to exclude those who ought not to be excluded, as the circumcision party were attempting to do. And yet, we ought to shut our ears to false gospels, and it is right to reckon them anathema, even if they are brought to us by angels or religiously impressive people. So here's some questions for reflection for today. Firstly, is Paul being arrogant when he tries to persuade the Galatians to listen to his gospel alone? Second, when is it wrong to separate ourselves from other believers, according to Galatians? And thirdly, finally, when is it wrong to exclude other believers? Pray through and ponder those things yourself today.